The twin girls mysteriously vanished while under their father's custody, but then their grandmother discovers something shocking. Beth arrived at her former home, parking outside the colonial-style house she left 10 days ago. The once pristine colonial house now showed signs of neglect. The white paint was peeling around the window frames, and the normally immaculate garden had weeds sprouting between the flower beds. She brushed her shoulder-length brown hair from her face and sat in her car for a moment, trying to compose herself after a morning spent putting up flyers of her missing twin daughters around town. Her hands still ached from stapling the papers to telephone poles and community boards. Each time she'd looked at her daughters' smiling faces on those flyers, it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Emma and Lily, only 4 years old, had been missing for 4 days now, 4 days of hell that Beth couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength before stepping out of the car. The neighborhood was quiet this afternoon, almost eerily so. No children playing in yards, no dogs barking, as if the entire street was holding its breath, waiting for news about the missing twins. Beth walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. The front door unlocked with the same key she'd used for years. Apparently changing the locks hadn't been on Peter's priority list since she'd moved out. Inside, the house smelled musty, with undertones of whiskey that made her stomach turn. The hardwood floors that she'd once polished religiously were now dull and scuffed. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing through the foyer. Beth entered the living room to find Detective Morris waiting, his notepad already open on his knee. Her estranged husband Peter sat on the couch looking disheveled, his usually neat reddish-blonde hair uncombed, a 3-day stubble darkening his jaw. His mother Claire, a frail woman in her 70s with thin white hair, sat rigidly in an armchair clutching a handkerchief. Her knuckles were white from the tension. "Mrs. Harmon," Detective Morris nodded, standing to greet her. He was a tall man with salt-and-pepper hair and kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Beth said, avoiding Peter's gaze. "Anything to help find the girls." She chose a seat as far from Peter as possible, perching on the edge of an ottoman near the fireplace. The mantel above it was dusty, and the family photos were arranged haphazardly, some face down as if they'd been knocked over and hastily replaced. "I wanted to go over your statements again," Detective Morris explained, clicking his pen. "Sometimes people remember details they didn't think were important the first time around." Peter shifted on the couch, the leather creaking beneath him. "I've told you everything already," he said, his voice hoarse. Beth could smell the alcohol on him from across the room. "Humor me," Morris replied firmly. "Let's start from the beginning, Mr. Harmon. Take me through that afternoon again." Peter sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "It was around 4 o'clock. The girls wanted to play hide-and-seek in the backyard. I counted to 20 while they hid." His voice cracked slightly. "When I went to look for them, they were gone. Just gone. I searched everywhere, behind the shed, in the bushes, under the deck. I called their names until my throat was raw." As Peter recounted the events of the twins' disappearance 4 days ago, Beth noticed Claire behaving oddly, jumping whenever a floorboard creaked, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The elderly woman twisted her handkerchief between her fingers, occasionally dabbing at eyes that weren't quite teary. "And the gate to the backyard?" Detective Morris asked. "You said it was closed?" "It was unlocked," Peter admitted with a shrug. "I must have forgotten to lock it after taking out the trash." Beth couldn't help but roll her eyes at this revelation. Typical Peter, careless about the most important things. Ever since losing his job, he'd grown increasingly negligent about basic safety measures around the house, despite her constant reminders about childproofing and security with toddlers around. His clumsiness and forgetfulness had been a source of countless arguments during their final months together. Detective Morris turned to Beth. "Mrs. Harmon, I understand you weren't living in the home at the time of the disappearance. Can you tell me about that?" Beth straightened her spine, feeling Peter's accusatory stare. "I moved out 10 days ago," she explained, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "I've been staying at the Pinewood Lakeside Campground." May I ask why you left? Beth glanced at Peter, who was now staring at the floor. Our marriage has been difficult for some time now, she said carefully. Peter lost his executive position at the bank 2 years ago. After that, things changed. Changed how? Detective Morris prompted. Beth explained her recent separation to the detective, describing how she moved to the lakeside campground after years of watching Peter's descent into alcoholism following the loss of his job. The drinking had started gradually, a few beers after dinner, then a bottle of wine each night, eventually graduating to whiskey at all hours. She'd tried to be supportive, encouraging him to seek help, but Peter had resisted, insisting he could handle it. I stayed as long as I could, Beth said, her voice barely above a whisper, for the girls. But it got to a point where I was afraid they'd grow up thinking that's what a marriage should look like. She couldn't help but glance at the family photo on the side table, the 4 of them smiling, the identical 4-year-old girls with their matching brown bob haircuts and pink outfits sitting on their parents' laps, a stark contrast to their current situation. It had been taken just 6 months ago, but it felt like a lifetime. Looking around, she noticed peeling wallpaper in the corners and water stains on the ceiling, signs of how their once beautiful home had fallen into disrepair as Peter's drinking consumed both their marriage and finances. The house that had once been her pride and joy was now a physical manifestation of everything that had gone wrong. "And where were you when the girls disappeared?" Detective Morris asked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. "I was at work," Beth replied. "I'm a nurse at Mercy General. I was on shift from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. There are dozens of witnesses who can confirm that." Peter made a scoffing sound, and Beth felt her cheeks flush with anger. Detective Morris made a note, then looked up. "We're checking all possibilities, Mrs. Harmon. Standard procedure." Claire suddenly stood up, her movements jerky. "I need some water," she announced, her voice thin and reedy. "Excuse me." As the elderly woman left the room, Beth couldn't help but notice how her hands trembled. Something about Claire's behavior felt off, but with the detective present and her mind consumed with worry for her daughters, Beth couldn't quite place what it was. Detective Morris stepped outside to take a call, leaving Beth alone with Peter and Claire, who had returned with a glass of water that she wasn't drinking. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from Beth's parents that now needed winding. Beth seized the opportunity to ask Claire about Peter's behavior since the girls disappeared. She moved closer to her mother-in-law, keeping her voice low. "Claire, how has Peter been coping?" she asked, genuinely concerned despite everything. "Has he been sleeping? Eating?" Claire's eyes darted to the doorway where Peter had gone to refill his drink. "He's managing," she said, her fingers twisting the handkerchief into knots. "Just overwhelmed with grief, that's all." "Has he said anything about what might have happened to the girls?" Beth pressed. Claire became evasive, her gaze not quite meeting Beth's. "No, nothing. He's as confused as the rest of us." She suddenly stood up. "I should check on him." As Claire hurried from the room, Beth felt her suspicions growing. In the 10 years she'd known Claire Harmon, she'd never seen the woman so agitated. Claire had always been composed, almost rigid in her propriety. This nervous, jumpy behavior was completely out of character. Throughout the afternoon, Beth observed Peter drinking heavily despite the ongoing investigation. He'd start with what looked like water, but was clearly vodka, then progress to openly pouring whiskey as the day wore on. His behavior grew increasingly paranoid, especially when anyone entered his study or touched the bookshelf, claiming they're disturbing his organization system. "Don't move those books," he snapped, when Detective Morris picked up a volume on child psychology. "I have a system." The detective raised an eyebrow but replaced the book exactly as he'd found it. "Mr. Harmon, we need to search the house thoroughly. Standard procedure in missing persons cases." "You've already searched it twice," Peter said, his words slightly slurred. "You won't find anything because I didn't do anything to my daughters." Beth winced at his defensive tone. No one had accused him of anything. yet he was behaving like a man with something to hide. Later, while helping gather recent photos of the twins for the investigation, Beth went upstairs to the bathroom the girls shared. She opened the medicine cabinet, looking for the small disposable camera she sometimes kept there, and noticed something odd. The twins' toothbrushes were missing from their colorful holders, shaped like butterflies. Beth frowned, searching through drawers and cabinets but couldn't find them anywhere. It seemed like a strange thing to disappear. Children's toothbrushes weren't typically items that would interest a kidnapper or thief. Her concern growing, Beth moved to the twins' bedroom. The room was exactly as she remembered it. 2 small beds with matching pink comforters, stuffed animals arranged carefully on each pillow, a bookshelf filled with picture books. She had been instructed to gather items with the twins' scent for the search dogs that would be arriving soon. But when she opened the top drawer of their dresser where she kept their hairbrushes and hair ties, she discovered those were missing too. When she confronted Peter about these missing items, he was in the kitchen pouring another drink. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements unsteady. "The girls' toothbrushes and hairbrushes are gone," she said, watching his reaction carefully. "Do you know where they are?" Peter shrugged dismissively. "I probably misplaced them while cleaning," he said, taking a long sip of whiskey. The explanation struck Beth as implausible given his disorganization. The house was clearly in a state of neglect. Dust on surfaces, dishes piled in the sink, laundry overflowing from the hamper. The idea that Peter had been cleaning anything, let alone small items like toothbrushes, seemed absurd. "Peter, when was the last time you cleaned anything?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. His face darkened. "What's that supposed to mean? You think because you left I can't take care of our home, our children?" "That's not what I said," Beth replied, trying to keep her voice level. "I'm just concerned about the missing items. The police might need them for DNA samples." "Well, I don't know where they are," Peter snapped, slamming his glass down on the counter hard enough that amber liquid sloshed over the rim. "Maybe if you hadn't abandoned us, things wouldn't be such a mess." Beth stepped back, recognizing the signs of Peter's temper flaring. It had been like this in the months before she left. His mood swinging wildly, innocent questions interpreted as accusations, everything she said twisted into an attack. "I didn't abandon our daughters," she said quietly. "I was trying to create a healthier environment for all of us." Peter laughed bitterly. "And how's that working out?" "Our daughters are missing, Beth. Missing, while you've been playing house in your little camper." Before Beth could respond, Detective Morris returned to the kitchen, his expression grim. "Mr. Harmon, we need to take another look at your backyard. The K9 unit is here." As Peter followed the detective outside, Claire appeared in the doorway, looking even more anxious than before. She hesitated at the threshold, her thin fingers still working the handkerchief. Her eyes darted nervously around the kitchen, as if checking whether they were truly alone. "Beth, Claire started, her voice barely above a whisper, then stopped abruptly when Peter's voice carried from the yard. Her expression shifted instantly from tentative resolve to fearful withdrawal. Without finishing her thought, she turned and hurried back toward the living room, leaving Beth alone with her growing suspicions. Beth watched her mother-in-law's retreat, the aborted conversation adding another layer to her unease. Whatever Claire had wanted to say, it clearly couldn't be spoken where Peter might overhear. For the next hour, Beth wandered the house restlessly, examining the twins' belongings and searching for any clue the police might have missed, while Detective Morris interviewed neighbors, and Peter remained outside with the K9 unit. Eventually, she found herself in the kitchen, unable to stand the chaos any longer. She was washing dishes that had clearly been sitting for days, trying to keep her hands busy to prevent herself from falling apart completely, when Claire entered. The older woman approached nervously, twisting her handkerchief and beginning to whisper something about the girls, her voice trembling. "Beth, I need to tell you something," Claire said, her voice barely audible over the running water. "About the girls, I think—" Before Claire could reveal anything, Peter appeared in the doorway with a glass of whiskey. His eyes darted suspiciously between them, bloodshot and unfocused. Claire paled visibly, her sentence cutting off mid-thought. "What are you two whispering about?" Peter demanded, leaning against the doorframe for support. "Nothing, dear," Claire said quickly, her entire demeanor changing in an instant. "I was just telling Beth we should make more flyers, perhaps with a different photo this time." Beth turned off the water, drying her hands on a dish towel as she studied her mother-in-law. Claire was lying, that much was obvious, but why? What had she been about to say about the twins? "That's a good idea," Beth said carefully, playing along. "I have some recent pictures on my phone we could use." Peter's gaze lingered on his mother, suspicion written across his features before he turned his attention to Beth. "The police were asking about you earlier," he said, his tone accusatory. "About your whereabouts the day the girls disappeared." Beth felt her heart rate quicken. "I already told them I was at work. My supervisor can confirm that." "Before work," Peter pressed. "They wanted to know where you were before your shift started." "I was at the campground," Beth replied, confused by this line of questioning. "I went straight from there to the hospital." Peter took a long sip of his whiskey. "Funny thing is, no one saw you at the campground that morning. The manager said your camper was there, but you weren't." Beth stared at him, bewildered. "That's because I left early for work. I had a 7 a.m. shift, Peter. I left the campground around 6:15. "So you say," Peter muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The implication hung in the air, and Beth felt a surge of anger. "Are you suggesting I had something to do with our daughter's disappearance?" Peter shrugged, a gesture that seemed calculated to provoke her. "I'm just saying it's interesting that you suddenly abandoned your family, and 10 days later, our daughters vanish without a trace." "I didn't abandon anyone," Beth said through gritted teeth. "I left you, Peter, not the girls. I was planning to file for custody once I had a proper place for us to live." "Ah, there it is," Peter said, his voice rising. "You were going to take my daughters away from me." Claire stepped between them, her thin hands raised placatingly. "Peter, please, this isn't helping find the girls." But Peter was too far gone, the alcohol fueling his paranoia and anger. He turned his accusations toward Beth, suggesting that if she hadn't abandoned their family, none of this would have happened. His words became increasingly cruel, designed to wound. "Maybe you took them," he said, pointing an unsteady finger at Beth. "Maybe this whole thing is your sick way of punishing me." "That's absurd," Beth gasped, genuinely shocked by the accusation. "They're my children. I would never—" "The police think it's possible," Peter interrupted. "They've been asking questions about your mental state, about how you've been handling the separation." Beth looked to Claire for support, but the older woman had retreated into herself, staring at the floor as if it might open up and swallow her. The tension escalated as Peter, now visibly drunk, suggested Beth's fragile mental state might be causing her to block out memories. He twisted her words and actions, attempting to cast suspicion on her. "Remember when you had that postpartum depression?" Peter said, his voice dripping with false concern. "How you couldn't remember whether you'd fed the girls or not. How you'd cry for hours over nothing." Beth felt her face flush with anger and shame. Her postpartum depression had been a difficult time, one that she'd worked hard to overcome with therapy and medication. For Peter to use it against her now was beyond cruel. "That was different," she said quietly. "I got help. I got better." "Did you?" Peter challenged. "Or are you just pretending to be better? Maybe you had some kind of episode. Maybe you took the girls somewhere and don't even remember doing it." "Stop it," Beth said, her voice breaking. "Just stop it, Peter. This isn't about me or you, it's about finding Emma and Lily." Peter's face contorted with rage. "Don't tell me what this is about. They're my daughters too, and they disappeared while under my care, and now everyone's looking at me like I'm some kind of monster." He slammed his glass down on the counter so hard it shattered, sending shards of glass and whiskey across the tile floor. Claire let out a small cry of alarm, backing away from her son. "Get out," Peter demanded, pointing toward the door. "Get out of my house, Beth, now." "Peter," Claire began, but he cut her off with a look. "This is my house," he continued, his voice rising to a shout. "My family. You gave up the right to be here when you walked out that door 10 days ago. Beth looked at Claire, who watched this confrontation with visible distress but remained silent. There was something in the older woman's eyes, a plea, perhaps, or a warning, but whatever she wanted to communicate, she couldn't say it in front of Peter. "Fine," Beth said, gathering her purse and phone. "I'll go, but this isn't over, Peter. I will find our daughters." As she walked toward the door, she heard Peter mutter behind her, "Maybe you should start by checking your own camper." The accusation hung in the air as Beth stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, tears of frustration and fear burning her eyes. Beth drove the winding road to the lakeside campground, tears blurring her vision. The sun was setting over the water, casting long shadows across the narrow road that snaked through the pine forest. In different circumstances, she might have found the view beautiful, the lake shimmering in the distance, the trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. Now, it only emphasized her isolation. She pulled into the gravel parking area beside her small camper that had become her temporary home. It was a modest 16-foot travel trailer, nothing fancy, but it had been all she could afford when she made the decision to leave. The campground was nearly empty this time of year, with only a few other campers scattered around the perimeter of the lake. Beth felt the isolation more acutely than ever as she stepped out of her car. The accusations Peter had hurled at her echoed in her mind. Could the police really suspect her of involvement in the twins' disappearance? The thought was so absurd, it would have been laughable if the situation weren't so dire. Emma and Lily were her world. Everything she did was for them. Inside the camper, Beth turned on the small space heater to chase away the evening chill. The interior was cramped but tidy, a small dinette that converted to a bed, a tiny kitchenette with a two-burner stove, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. She'd made it as homey as possible, with a colourful throw blanket and a few family photos, including one of the twins on their second birthday just 3 months ago. Beth heated a can of soup on the tiny stove, but could only manage a few spoonfuls. Her appetite had vanished the moment her daughters did. The soup grew cold as she sat at the dinette, her mind replaying Peter's accusations and Claire's strange behavior, searching for what she might be missing. There was something off about the whole situation. The missing toothbrushes and hairbrushes, Claire's nervous behavior, Peter's paranoia about his study and the bookshelf. None of it made sense if the girls had truly been abducted from the backyard by a stranger. Beth pulled out a notebook and began to write down everything she could remember from the past few days, trying to organize her thoughts. She created a timeline, starting from the day she left the house with just a suitcase and the promise to return for the girls once she had a more permanent living situation. Day 1. Left home. Peter angry but not violent. Girls crying but calm when I explained I'd see them soon. Day 2 to 3. Daily video calls with the girls. Peter civil but cold during our conversations. Day 4. First visit with the girls at the park. Peter watched the entire time, barely speaking to me. Day 5. Video calls becoming tense. Peter interrupting and cutting calls short. Day 6. Girls reported missing. Peter claims they vanished during hide-and-seek in the backyard. Day 8 to 10. Endless searching, police interviews, putting up flyers around town. No leads. Beth set her pen down and rubbed her temples. Peter's explanation about misplacing the girls' toothbrushes and hairbrushes while cleaning echoing in her mind. The man she'd lived with for years could barely remember to put his dirty clothes in the hamper. The idea of him suddenly cleaning small bathroom items was absurd. Something wasn't adding up, and her instincts as a mother were screaming that there was more to this story. Beth attempted to distract herself by organizing the limited space in her camper, folding and refolding the few clothes she'd brought, arranging and rearranging the canned goods in the tiny pantry. But her mind kept returning to the inconsistencies, to Claire's aborted attempt to tell her something about the girls. What had Claire been about to say before Peter interrupted them? Her mother-in-law had been on the verge of revealing something important. Beth was certain of it. And the way she'd jumped when Peter appeared, the fear in her eyes. Claire was afraid of her own son. Outside, the night had fully descended, and the woods around the campground were dark and silent, except for the occasional hoot of an owl. Beth checked her phone for the 100th time, hoping for news from Detective Morris, but there were no messages. She felt utterly alone, cut off from her daughters and from any hope of finding them. A soft knocking on her door startled Beth from her thoughts. Her heart raced as she approached the door cautiously. Who would be visiting her here at this hour? For a brief, hopeful moment, she wondered if it might be Detective Morris with news about the twins. She peered through the small window in the door and gasped. Claire was standing there, appearing to have aged years in just hours. Her white hair was disheveled, her face pale and drawn. The older woman glanced nervously over her shoulder at the dark woods, clearly terrified of being followed. Beth quickly unlocked the door. "Claire, what are you doing here?" Claire didn't answer immediately, just pushed past Beth into the camper, her entire body trembling. She looked around the small space as if checking for hidden listeners before finally turning to face her daughter-in-law. "I couldn't stay silent any longer," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "Not after what I found." Claire entered the camper, hands trembling as she sank onto the small dinette bench. Beth quickly closed and locked the door behind her, drawing the curtains for privacy. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling through the pine trees surrounding the campground. "Claire, what's going on?" Beth asked, sitting across from her mother-in-law. "Do you know something about the girls?" Claire nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "They're alive," she whispered, and Beth felt her heart leap. "They're alive, and they're at the house." Beth stared at her in confusion. "What? The police searched the house multiple times. How could they—" "There's a hidden room," Claire interrupted, her voice barely audible, "behind the bookcase in Peter's study, a secret renovation he had done months earlier." Beth's mind raced, trying to process this information. A hidden room. It seemed like something from a mystery novel, not real life. And yet, it would explain Peter's paranoia about anyone touching the bookshelf, his insistence that no one disturb his organization system. Claire described finding the twins inside the hidden room that morning. While Peter was in the shower, she'd been dusting his study, something she did routinely when visiting her son. She'd accidentally knocked a book from the shelf, and when she went to replace it, she noticed something odd about the way the bookcase was attached to the wall. Curious, she'd pushed against it and discovered it could swing outward, revealing a small room behind it. "The girls were there," Claire said, her voice breaking, huddled together on a mattress. "They were unharmed, with toys, books, food, and all their missing items. Emma recognized me immediately, called me Gamma. They seemed confused but not frightened." Beth felt dizzy with this revelation, a mixture of relief and horror washing over her. "But why? Why would Peter do this?" Claire's face crumpled with shame. "When I confronted him, he admitted staging their disappearance to prevent you from taking them in the divorce. He said he couldn't bear to lose his daughters after losing everything else, that he'd rather everyone think they were dead than let you have custody." Beth pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. The twins were alive, that was what mattered most, but the betrayal cut deep. Peter had put her through hell, let her believe their precious daughters might be dead or suffering, all to punish her for leaving him. Claire confessed she initially said nothing, torn between protecting her son and saving her granddaughters. She'd been raised to believe that family loyalty came first, that a mother should stand by her child no matter what. But as the day progressed and she watched Peter's behavior grow increasingly erratic, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. "I told myself they were safe," Claire whispered, tears streaming down her lined face. "That Peter would never hurt them. That maybe this was for the best, keeping the family together." "What changed your mind?" Beth asked gently. "After you left this afternoon, I overheard Peter on the phone," Claire explained. "He was talking about taking the girls somewhere nobody would find them. He mentioned Canada, crossing the border. I realized then that this wasn't just about keeping them from you temporarily. He was planning to disappear with them completely." Beth felt cold fear grip her heart. If Peter managed to take the twins across the border, they might never be found. "We have to call the police right now," Beth insisted, reaching again for her phone. As Claire finished her confession, headlights suddenly cut through the darkness, illuminating the camper windows. The beams swept across the interior as a vehicle pulled up outside, the engine growling before cutting off abruptly. "It's Peter!" Claire gasped, her face draining of color. "He must have followed me. I was so careful. I checked to make sure he was asleep before I took his car, but he must have—" Her words were cut off by heavy footsteps on the gravel outside, followed by a pounding on the door that shook the entire camper. "Beth, I know my mother's in there." Peter's voice was slurred but loud. "Open this door right now." Beth put a finger to her lips, signaling Claire to be quiet as she reached for her phone. Before she could dial, the pounding came again, harder this time. "I can see both your cars. Open the door or I'll break it down." The door handle jiggled violently, and then there was a moment of silence. Beth thought perhaps Peter had given up, but then came the sound of something heavy hitting the door, once, twice, and on the third impact the flimsy lock gave way. The door flew open, banging against the interior wall of the camper. Peter stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his face contorted with rage. In his right hand he held a gun. "Hello, ladies," he said, stepping into the camper and closing the door behind him. "Having a nice chat about me?" The air seemed to freeze in Beth's lungs as she stared at the weapon in Peter's hand. Claire let out a small whimper beside her, shrinking back against the dinette bench. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The three of them locked in a terrible tableau illuminated only by the camper's dim interior lights. Then Peter's composure shattered completely. He screamed about betrayal as he waved the gun inside the confined space of the camper. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, his movements jerky and unpredictable. The small interior of the camper, which had always felt cozy to Beth, now seemed suffocatingly small, with Peter's rage filling every corner. "My own mother," Peter spat, glaring at Claire, "sneaking around behind my back, conspiring with her." He jabbed the gun toward Beth. "Did you tell her everything, Mother? About how I've been protecting my daughters from their unstable mother?" "Peter, please," Claire pleaded, her voice trembling. "Put the gun down. Think about what you're doing." Beth watched Peter carefully, noting how his hand shook as he gripped the weapon. She'd never seen him with a gun before, hadn't even known he owned one. The situation was volatile, dangerous, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panicking wouldn't help the twins. "The girls are safe, Peter," Beth said softly, trying to reason with him while Claire managed to secretly slide her hand into her pocket, where her cell phone was hidden. "That's what matters most, right? That Emma and Lily are safe." "Safe from you," Peter shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You were going to take them away from me, their own father." "I never wanted to keep them from you," Beth said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I just wanted us all to be healthy and happy. We could have worked out shared custody." Peter laughed bitterly. "Shared custody? So you could poison them against me? Turn them into little Beth clones who think their daddy is a failure?" With nowhere to hide in the cramped quarters, Beth realized they needed to buy time until help arrived at their remote location. Claire had managed to dial 911 on her cell phone hidden in her pocket. Beth had seen the subtle movement, the way Claire's hand remained in her pocket, her thumb occasionally moving as if pressing buttons. But the campground was at least 15 minutes from town, even with sirens blaring. They needed to keep Peter talking, keep him from doing something irreversible before help could arrive. "I would never do that," Beth said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "The girls adore you, Peter. You're their father. Nothing could change that." For a brief moment, something like hope flickered in Peter's eyes. The gun lowered slightly as he looked at Beth. "Then come back," he said, his voice suddenly pleading rather than threatening. "Come back to us, Beth. We can be a family again. I'll stop drinking. I'll get help. I promise." Beth saw Claire silently edging toward the door, moving inch by inch while Peter's attention was focused on his wife. It was risky. If Peter noticed, he might react violently. But if Claire could get outside, she might be able to flag down help, or at least get to a place where she could speak to the 911 operator. "I want us to be a family too," Beth said carefully, keeping Peter's attention on her. "But we need to do it the right way, starting with bringing the girls out of that hidden room and letting them know everything's going to be okay." Peter's eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "You're lying," he said flatly. "I can always tell when you're lying, Beth. Your left eye twitches just a little bit." He raised the gun again, pointing it directly at her. "You're just saying what you think I want to hear until the police arrive." Beth's breath caught in her throat. Had he somehow realized Claire had called for help? But no, he was just being paranoid, jumping to the conclusion that she would have contacted authorities. "No police," Beth assured him, raising her hands placatingly. "It's just us, Peter. Just family trying to work things out." "Family?" Peter repeated, his voice rising again. "You stopped being family when you walked out that door, when you abandoned us." "I never abandoned the girls," Beth insisted, fighting to keep her voice calm. "I was always coming back for them." "Liar!" Peter roared, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, several things happened at once. Claire lunged for the door, throwing it open to the night air. Peter whirled toward the movement, the gun following his gaze, and in the distance, barely audible at first but growing louder by the second, came the wail of police sirens. Peter's face contorted with rage and betrayal as he realized what was happening. "You called them," he snarled, turning back to Beth. "You've been stalling." "Peter, don't," Beth pleaded, seeing his finger tense on the trigger. "Think of the girls. They need both their parents." For a heartbeat, Peter seemed to consider her words. His hand wavered, the gun lowering slightly as hope flickered across his face. Beth saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, vulnerable, hurt, desperate for connection. "They need their father," Peter whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm their father." "Yes, you are," Beth agreed softly, "and they love you so much, but this isn't the way, Peter. This isn't who you really are." The sirens grew louder, piercing the night. Blue and red lights began to flash through the trees surrounding the campground, illuminating the interior of the camper in alternating colors. Peter's face twisted as reality crashed back in. "It's too late," he said, his voice hollow. "They'll take the girls, they'll take me away, I'll lose everything." Beth saw Claire silently edging toward the door, but then Peter's eyes narrowed as he accused Beth of lying. The momentary connection was gone, replaced by paranoia and rage. "You never intended to come back," he snarled. "This was all part of your plan to take everything from me." Peter raised the gun again, his finger tightening on the trigger, just as police sirens wailed in the distance. The sound seemed to trigger something in him, a realization that he was cornered, that there was no escape. In a swift, terrible motion, Peter turned the gun away from Beth and pressed it against his own temple. "No," Beth cried, lunging forward. "Peter, don't!" Claire screamed, reaching for her son. But before either woman could reach him, the camper door burst open. Two police officers rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed in the confined space. "Drop the weapon, now!" Peter froze, the gun still pressed to his head, his eyes wild with panic and desperation. "Sir, put the gun down," one officer said, his voice firm but calm. "Let's talk about this." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Peter stood motionless, the barrel of the gun pressed against his skin. Beth held her breath, terrified of what might happen next. Then slowly, Peter's shoulders slumped. The gun lowered, falling from his fingers to the floor of the camper, with a dull thud. "My daughters," he mumbled as the officers moved in to restrain him. "I just wanted to keep my daughters." As they handcuffed Peter and led him from the camper, Beth caught a glimpse of his face, tears streaming down his cheeks, all the rage gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that broke her heart, despite everything he'd done. Detective Morris appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Mrs. Harmon, are you all right?" Beth nodded, though she felt anything but all right. "The girls," she said urgently, "they're at the house, in a hidden room behind the bookcase in Peter's study." Morris's eyebrows shot up, but to his credit he didn't waste time asking questions. He spoke rapidly into his radio, dispatching officers to the house with specific instructions about the bookcase. "We need to go there now," Beth insisted, already reaching for her coat. "The girls will be frightened. They need me." "Of course," Morris agreed. "We'll take you there immediately." As they hurried to the detective's car, Beth glanced back at Peter, now sitting in the back of a police cruiser. Their eyes met briefly through the window, and in that moment, Beth felt not hatred, but profound sadness for the man who had once been her husband, the father of her children, before alcohol and desperation had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. Claire joined Beth in Detective Morris's car, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beth reached over and took the older woman's hand, squeezing it gently. Despite Claire's initial silence, she had ultimately found the courage to do the right thing, to choose her granddaughter's safety over loyalty to her son. As they sped toward the house, Beth's thoughts were only of Emma and Lily. Had they been frightened in that hidden room? Did they understand what was happening? Had Peter told them why their mother hadn't come to see them? The questions swirled in her mind as the car raced through the night, carrying her back to the daughters she had feared she might never see again. Beth, Claire, and 4 police officers rushed to the house in separate vehicles. The night was clear and cold, stars visible in the inky sky above as they sped through the quiet streets. Beth's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and overwhelming relief, making it difficult to breathe. When they arrived, the house was dark and silent. An officer switched on the porch light as they approached, the sudden illumination making the peeling paint and neglected flower beds look even more forlorn. Beth fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly that Detective Morris gently took them from her and unlocked the door himself. Inside, the house smelled musty and stale, with lingering notes of whiskey and unwashed dishes. The officers moved efficiently, switching on lights and doing a quick sweep of the main floor before heading toward Peter's study. Beth followed close behind, with Claire at her side. The elderly woman seemed to have aged a decade in the past few hours, her face lined with grief and worry, but there was determination in her step as they approached the study door. The room was exactly as Beth remembered it. Dark wood paneling, heavy curtains, a large desk cluttered with papers and empty glasses. The bookcase that covered the far wall seemed ordinary enough, filled with leather-bound volumes that Peter had collected over the years, many of them unread but impressive looking. "It's behind there," Claire said, pointing with a trembling finger. "There's a mechanism, a latch or something. Peter showed me once years ago when the house was first built. It was supposed to be a panic room in case of intruders." One of the officers approached the bookcase, examining it carefully. "Ma'am, do you remember how to open it?" Claire shook her head. "I just pushed on it earlier today and it moved. I think it might have been left unlocked." The officer tried pushing on various sections of the bookcase, but nothing happened. After several attempts, he turned to his colleagues. "We might need tools to force it open." "No," Beth said firmly. "My daughters are in there. We're not using crowbars or anything that might frighten them more than they already are." She approached the bookcase herself, running her hands along the shelves, looking for anything unusual. As her fingers traced the spines of the books, she noticed one that seemed different from the others, a copy of The Secret Garden that had been a gift from Beth to Peter on their first anniversary. Unlike the other volumes, this one was pulled slightly forward. Acting on instinct, Beth pulled the book further out. There was a soft click, and the entire right section of the bookcase swung outward an inch or two. "That's it," Claire whispered. "That's how he must have been opening it." An officer forced open the bookshelf, revealing the hidden room behind it. Beth's heart stopped for a moment as light spilled into the darkness, illuminating the small space beyond. There, huddled together on a mattress on the floor, were Emma and Lily. They were dressed in matching pajamas, their brown hair tangled from sleep, their eyes wide with confusion as they blinked in the sudden light. "Mommy," Emma said, her small voice uncertain. Beth's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Yes, baby, it's Mommy," she managed to say through the tears that had begun streaming down her face. The twins ran into their mother's arms, crying and clinging to her as Beth fought back tears. She knelt on the floor, gathering both girls against her chest, breathing in their familiar scent of baby shampoo and the faint sweetness that was uniquely theirs. "I missed you, Mommy," Lily sobbed, her little arms wrapped tightly around Beth's neck. "I missed you too, my loves," Beth whispered, kissing their foreheads, their cheeks, their tiny hands. "So much." Claire stood in the doorway, her face showing both relief and grief while watching the reunion. Tears streamed down her lined cheeks as she observed her granddaughters, safe but clearly confused by the commotion. The hidden room was small, perhaps 8 feet square, with no windows and only the single entrance through the bookcase. Peter had furnished it with a mattress on the floor, covered with the twins' favorite blankets and stuffed animals. A small lamp provided dim light, and a shelf held books, toys, and snacks. In the corner sat a portable potty chair and a stack of clean clothes. It was clear he had planned this carefully, creating a space where the twins could be comfortable for an extended period. The thought sent a chill down Beth's spine. How long had Peter intended to keep them hidden here? Police officers documented everything, photographing the hidden room and collecting evidence. One officer carefully bagged the missing toothbrushes and hairbrushes that sat on a small shelf, while another took pictures of the room's layout and contents. "Gamma, why are the police here?" Emma asked, looking up at Claire with confusion. "Daddy said we were playing a special hiding game." Claire knelt beside the girls, her voice gentle despite her obvious distress. "The game is over now, sweetheart. You're going home with your mommy." "But Daddy said Mommy was lost," Lily said, her lower lip trembling. "He said we had to hide until she found her way back." Beth felt a surge of anger at Peter's manipulation, but she kept her voice calm for the girls' sake. "I was never lost, my loves. I was looking for you everywhere, and now I've found you, and we're going to be together." Detective Morris approached, his expression softening as he observed the reunion. "Mrs. Harmon, we'll need to take the girls to the hospital for a checkup. Standard procedure in cases like this." Beth nodded, understanding the necessity even as she dreaded separating from her daughters again, even briefly. "Of course, can I stay with them?" "Absolutely," Morris assured her. "We'll need statements from all of you, but that can wait until tomorrow. For now, let's make sure the girls are healthy." Beth comforted her daughters, assuring them they're safe now while trying to process the betrayal herself. She couldn't allow herself to fall apart, not when Emma and Lily needed her to be strong. There would be time later to deal with her own emotions, the anger, the relief, the lingering fear. "Are we going to the doctor?" Lily asked, her small face scrunched with worry. "Just for a quick checkup," Beth assured her, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. "The doctors want to make sure you're both healthy and strong." "Like when we get our shots?" Emma asked, clearly not thrilled with the prospect. Beth smiled, her heart overflowing with love for these resilient little girls. "No shots today, I promise. Just a nice doctor who wants to make sure you're okay." An ambulance arrived outside, and paramedics entered to check the twins. The EMTs were kind and gentle, speaking to the girls in cheerful voices as they took their vital signs and asked simple questions about how they were feeling. "Your daughters seem to be in good health," one paramedic told Beth, "but we should still transport them to the hospital for a more thorough examination." Beth insisted on staying with her daughters every moment as they're guided outside to the waiting ambulance. The night air was cool, and she wrapped a blanket around each girl as they walked to the vehicle. Emma and Lily looked around with wide eyes, clearly confused by all the activity. The police cars with their flashing lights, the neighbors who had begun to gather on their porches to watch the commotion. "Where's Daddy?" Emma asked suddenly, looking back at the house. Beth exchanged a glance with Detective Morris, unsure how to answer. How did you explain to a 2-year-old that her father had hidden her away and lied to everyone? "Daddy had to go somewhere for a while," Claire said gently, saving Beth from having to respond. "But he loves you very much." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. There would be time later for more difficult conversations, for healing the wounds that Peter's actions had created. For now, all that mattered was that Emma and Lily were safe, and they were going home. Beth and Claire rode in the ambulance alongside the twins as they headed to the hospital. Emma and Lily lay side by side on the gurney, holding hands as they had since infancy. "Why did Daddy make us hide in the wall?" Lily asked, her small face serious. Beth stroked her daughter's hair. Daddy was confused, sweetheart. He made a mistake. He said it was a special game, Emma added, but I didn't like it. It was dark and scary sometimes. Beth felt her heart breaking at these simple words. I know, baby, but the game is over now and you don't have to be scared anymore. At the hospital, the twins were examined while Beth answered questions about their medical history. The girls clung to their mother, frightened and confused. While the twins underwent their checkup, Beth and Claire sat side by side in the waiting room. I made the same mistake twice, Claire whispered. First with Peter's father, then with Peter himself. I chose loyalty to a man over the safety of a child. Claire explained that watching her granddaughters through the crack in the hidden door, she saw the same fear she once felt in her own abusive marriage. I couldn't let another generation of children grow up thinking that love means control and fear, Claire said, her voice stronger now. When I heard Peter talking about taking them away, crossing the border, I knew I had to break the cycle. What will happen to Peter? Claire asked, her voice small. I don't know exactly. He'll face charges, but he'll also get help, Claire. The kind of help he should have had years ago. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her lined face. I failed him, she whispered. No, Beth said firmly. You gave him what you could with what you knew then. And today you saved your granddaughters. That's not failure, that's courage. When a nurse appeared to tell them the girls were asking for them, Beth invited Claire to come along. Claire seemed surprised. You still want me in their lives after everything? You're their grandmother, Beth said simply. You made a mistake, but then you made it right. That's what I want the girls to learn. As Beth gathered her daughters close, she knew the road ahead would not be easy. But looking at her daughters' faces, at their resilience and trust despite what they'd been through, Beth felt hope rising within her. The cycle of trauma that had shaped Peter's life would end with him. Emma and Lily would grow up knowing what healthy love looked like. Love that set you free rather than locked you away. For now it was enough that they were safe, that they were together, and that the long night of fear and separation was finally over. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they would face them as a family, bound by love and the promise of a better future.